So what we want to do is show you some examples of some implementation. So Vidscape, the backend platform, as well as our off-the-shelf apps, are actually pre-integrated with Ncanto and the technology. So I just want to show a few sample implementations. So what you've seen on the screen at the moment is our Vidscape application running in an emulator, an Android emulator. And what you see on screen is a very typical tiled interface of showing content. At the top of the screen, you can see different groups of content, new releases, action, war. But right underneath, what you'll see is some various filters. So you'll see that you've got latest, popular, and recommended. So latest is obviously content that's last been published, the last content published. Popular is based on a collaborative decision of what content is being watched the most at the moment. But what happens is when we click recommended, our system makes a call to Ncanto to share what content is currently available on the screen and who is the user who is actually logged in and making this request. And what the system does is it automatically orders the content from most recommended to least recommended. But there is one other aspect as well. You'll notice there is now less content on the screen. So from the Ncanto Business Manager, you are also able to set kind of limitations on strictness on how sensitive the scores are. So over a certain score, only that content will show. So what this focuses on is making sure that the content delivered to the user is only the most relevant content. So what I'd like to do is just move on to another example. This is what we call essentially the recommended home screen. So I'm just going to also show you quickly an example of our backend system. So if I go to the layout management functionality of our system, the menu management in the setting, what you'll notice, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but just roughly in the middle of the screen, you can see this recommended content and groups. So this is essentially how you manage what appears on the screens within your OTT service. And this toggle allows you to say that I want the home screen for the user to be recommended, not necessarily just in terms of content, but also the groups of content. And if you look a little bit further below, you'll see a list of groups. And these groups are, in our system, are based on any criteria. It can be based on metadata, genres, pricing, and various other. And you can combine these rules to come up with very dynamic groups. But what this, you'll also see the list of groups featured adventure, comedy, thriller. And within that, you have these on-off toggles. And these toggles allow you to say, as an operator, I want to prefix certain groups. So no matter whether the groups on the homepage are recommended or not, still the groups that I want to show still appear. So at the moment, you see that featured is there, and you've got these other ones. So if I go back to the app, what you'll see is that exact same list: adventure, comedy, thriller, and Brad Pitt, which is a category based on an actor. And I'm just going to quickly log in as a user. My simple passwords. So this user we have prescribed to be a female in their 40s and watches daytime television. So we actually invited some people to create actual profiles based on liking and disliking content. And now what you'll see is that the groups of content on the home screen have now all changed. And it's completely based on this user and what is what's recommended to them. But even within the group itself, you will see that the posters themselves, the content itself is also recommended. So from the left, where the user's natural starting position is, they're seeing the most relevant content. And as they scroll to the right, they will see less and less recommended content. And I think we had a discussion a little bit earlier on about hybrid. So what we've essentially allowed is operators within this tool, what I showed you in the back end, is to create a hybrid where they can maintain a very recommended and personalized home screen, but a little bit similar to Netflix, but they can also push certain types of content of their own if they have certain rules that they have to follow, etc.
Yeah, and actually even a combination of that. So you can also have, for example, an editorial recommendation row here, if you like, but you can also then run those editorial recommendations through the profiles of the user. And then you have the kind of personal recommendations based on editorial recommendations, if you like. But I would like to use also here the opportunity of the screen to answer Eva's question, who basically asked, you know, when we're real time, how can we create more relevant lean back experience? So Eva, what we do is basically we identify in a lean back environment, obviously not only explicit information from the user, like a rating, for example, of content, but we also use implicit information which is provided to us by the platform, for example, by Vidscape. If somebody clicks, for example, on a poster here, or if somebody watches the movie to learn about this experience, and then we take every single feedback from the platform in consideration straight away. And one of the examples where you can see this immediately is when Saqib now presses the info button, is you will see an explanation why this particular asset has been recommended to you. And that's a very, very detailed explanation. And this is exactly what we learn from these kind of interactions of the user. And again, they can be explicit by, for example, the like and the dislike button on the middle of the screen here, but they can also be implicit just by the fact that you're watching on the detail page, or by the fact that you have watched the content full time, or maybe just 5% of it, or you bought it, or something alike. And then everything contributes to additional use cases, like, for example, where we can add a score, where we can show the user how much he might like this particular content. I'll show you that in a second, but also, for example, for the explanation.
Okay. But I mean, this message as well that you see, which is appearing and disappearing too quickly for my liking, is you can actually change the messaging. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can decide how many explanations you would like to have, how deep you would like to go, how accessible this information is for the user. You can also ask him to interact if you're on a tablet, for example. Yeah. So you can basically decide through the management tool in the background by us. So you don't have to decide it straight away through the client integration. So you can start off with maybe just one layer of explanation, and then you say it's not good enough. You can then add a second or a third layer. As long as you have the real estate in the user interface, that's no problem. You don't have to reintegrate.
Okay. Well, at the moment, we're actually just using the single API for everything. And I'm about to move on to the final part of my implementation use cases. And we're using that same API. So that information that we're showing is actually coming directly from Ncanto. So the final implementation example is that of a linear broadcast environment. So from our perspective, a typical user, when he goes to the EPG, he's always flooded with a large amount of content. And I think we've got some customers on this, so they'll probably be interested in seeing this as well. Obviously, when a user is flooded with content, it makes it very difficult to make decisions on what they want to watch in a linear broadcast environment. So what we've integrated using the same API from Ncanto is show recommended. And what you'll notice is now some of the content on screen has been starred. And what this essentially shows the user is only content, for example, that is most recommended to them based on their preferences and based on the information that's been collected by Ncanto. And the sensitivity of this as well can be managed directly in Ncanto's business manager, but the user also, and we're looking at some use cases around this at the moment, whereby we can extend some control and functionality to the user so they can see this information. So when these recommendations come back, we can display it in a couple of ways. We've shown it on screen as a complete UI where it shows all of the content in the EPG, irrespective of recommendations. But we can also show that in a collapsed view where the user can select something, and then they can also set up a reminder, and then they get a push notification on their phone to remind them that the show's about to start. Okay, so I mean, that finishes my implementation. Just another point on Iva's question as well. One of the next things that Vodworks and Ncanto are embarking on is combining the linear broadcast content EPG as well as VOD content and trying to put it back into one home environment where everything's pushed. And to the user. So, you know, you'll even see actually on the home screen, we started work on this. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. You will see just directly below, we're recommending channels, and already we're recommending back now playing content to the user. And that is actually customizable, so it shows only recommended. So they have access to all content from one screen.